Preston Vance walked into the settlement, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, with his mistress, Tiffany, clinging to his arm like a trophy. He was the face of Vance Global, the city's biggest real estate empire, and he was ready to crush his simple housewife of a partner, Vivian, with a pitiful alimony offer. He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected her to crumble. But when the doors opened, Vivian didn't walk in with a tissue. She walked in with a team of forensic accountants and a single, terrifying red binder. Preston thought he was the shark, but he was about to discover he had been swimming in her ocean all along. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Sterling & Associates law firm offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a skyline that Preston Vance liked to believe he owned. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit. He checked his reflection in the glass, smoothing back his silver fox hair. He looked every inch the tycoon, powerful, untouchable, and currently incredibly bored. Sitting at the long mahogany table behind him was Tiffany Banks. She was 24 years old, a former fitness influencer, and the woman Preston had decided was better suited for his public image than his wife of 20 years. Tiffany was currently busy scrolling through her phone, loudly tapping her acrylic nails against the screen. "Babe," Tiffany said, popping a piece of gum, "do you think we can get the beach house in the settlement? I was looking at decorators, and the current vibe is just so dusty. It smells like old books and sadness." Preston turned, flashing his signature charming smile, the one that had closed billion-dollar deals, or so he told the press. "Tiffany, darling, we aren't just getting the beach house. We're getting everything. Vivian doesn't have the stomach for a fight. She's soft. She's spent the last 2 decades baking cookies and volunteering at the library. She doesn't know the first thing about asset liquidation or offshore holdings." He walked over and kissed Tiffany on the forehead. "Besides, the prenup is ironclad, and the business is in my name. Vance Global is mine. She's lucky I'm generous enough to offer her the condo in the suburbs and a monthly stipend." Sitting across the table, Preston's lawyer, Derek Sterling, didn't look as relaxed. Derek was a man who billed $600 an hour and had seen enough divorces to know that quiet wives were often the most dangerous. He shuffled his papers nervously. "Preston," Derek said, his voice low, "I still think bringing Miss Banks to the mediation is a mistake. It's inflammatory. The judge won't look kindly on it if this goes to trial, and it's going to antagonize Vivian. We want her to sign quickly, right?" Preston scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Derek, you worry too much. That's why I pay you. Vivian isn't going to be antagonized. She's going to be intimidated. Seeing Tiffany here sends a message. I have moved on. I am powerful, and she is yesterday's news. She'll sign whatever you put in front of her just to get out of the room." Preston checked his Rolex. It was 10:05 a.m. She's late. Typical. Probably crying in her car, trying to work up the courage to face me. "Or she's strategizing," Derek muttered, though Preston ignored him. The narrative Preston had built for himself was seductive. In the magazines, he was the visionary genius who turned a small loan into a real estate empire. He was the man who revitalized the waterfront. Vivian was just the woman who stood silently beside him at galas, holding her clutch and smiling politely when spoken to. In Preston's mind, she was a dependent, a liability. "I just hope this doesn't take all day," Tiffany whined, kicking her feet up onto the empty chair next to her, the chair meant for Vivian's counsel. "I have a spa appointment at 2. You promised we'd celebrate tonight at Le Monde." "We will, darling," Preston assured her. "This is just a formality, a signature, a handshake, and then we erase the last 20 years. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open. The air in the room seemed to shift, the temperature dropping a few degrees. It wasn't Vivian who entered first. It was a young man in a sharp grey suit, carrying 2 heavy boxes of files. He placed them on the table with a heavy thud that made Tiffany jump. Then came another paralegal, placing a laptop and a projector on the table. "What is all this?" Preston asked, annoyed. "We aren't here for a presentation. We're here to settle." Then Vivian Vance walked in. Preston blinked. He almost didn't recognize her. The Vivian he knew wore sensible cardigans, little to no makeup, and kept her hair in a messy bun. She usually looked tired, worn down by managing their domestic life. The woman who walked in was wearing a tailored navy power suit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob that framed her face. She wore red lipstick, a shade Preston hadn't seen on her in 15 years. She didn't look tired. She looked electric. She didn't look at Preston. She didn't look at Tiffany. She walked to the head of the table opposite Preston, pulled out the chair, and sat down with a grace that commanded absolute silence. Behind her walked a man Preston recognized instantly, and for the first time that morning, a cold knot of fear formed in his stomach. It was Arthur Penhaligon. Arthur Penhaligon wasn't a divorce lawyer. He was a corporate shark, a litigator known for destroying hostile takeovers and burying CEOs in federal investigations. He was the kind of lawyer you called when you wanted to burn a company to the ground, not when you wanted to split a retirement fund. "Mr. Penhaligon?" Derek Sterling stood up, his voice cracking slightly. "I wasn't aware you were representing Mrs. Vance. This is a family law matter." Arthur Penhaligon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He set his leather briefcase down. "Sit down, Derek. This stopped being a family law matter the moment your client decided to defraud his primary investor." Preston laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Investor? What are you talking about? Vivian is my wife, not a shareholder. She doesn't own a single share of Vance Global." Vivian finally looked at him. Her eyes were cold, hard flint. "Hello, Preston. Who's the child?" She gestured vaguely toward Tiffany. Tiffany bristled, dropping her feet from the chair. "I'm his fiancée, and I'm not a child." "Fiancée?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Participating in bigamy before the divorce is final. Bold strategy. But I'm not talking about your relationship status. I'm asking why you brought a spectator to a business audit." "This is a settlement hearing." Preston slammed his hand on the table. "Stop playing games, Vivian. You want the house? Fine. Take it. But don't come in here with Arthur Penhaligon pretending you're some kind of corporate player. You don't know the first thing about my business." Vivian reached into her bag and pulled out a single, thick document. She slid it across the table. It wasn't a divorce petition. "I know everything about the business, Preston," she said, her voice smooth as velvet. "Because I designed it. I built it. And according to this founding charter from 20 years ago, I own it." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Preston stared at the document in front of him, but he didn't pick it up. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. "You're delusional," Preston sneered, leaning back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. You built Vance Global? Vivian, be serious. While I was out there meeting with zoning boards and securing loans from the bank, you were home deciding what color napkins we should use for dinner parties." Tiffany giggled, covering her mouth. "That's actually kind of sad. She thinks she has a job." Vivian ignored the girl entirely. She turned her gaze to Derek, Preston's lawyer. Mr. Sterling, as an officer of the court, I assume you've done your due diligence regarding the origins of Vance Global. Specifically, the initial capital injection and the intellectual property rights regarding the Skyline algorithm that the entire company is based on. Derek blinked, looking confused. The Skyline algorithm? That's Preston's proprietary method for predicting real estate trends. He developed it in 2005. Did he? Vivian asked softly. Preston, tell them the code for the algorithm. Tell them the base logic. Preston's face flushed a deep, angry red. Don't quiz me on my own company, Vivian. It's complex data. I have a CTO for that now. I'm the vision guy. I'm the face. Exactly, Vivian said. You're the face. You've always been the face because you liked the cameras and I liked the quiet. But we need to clarify history before we discuss money. Vivian signaled to Arthur Penhaligon. The lawyer nodded and connected his laptop to the projector. A blurry photo from 2004 appeared on the screen. It showed a tiny, cramped apartment. The table was covered in architectural blueprints and stacks of coding manuals. In the corner, a young Preston was asleep on the couch, a beer in his hand. At the table, a young Vivian was hunched over a laptop, writing furiously. Flashback, Vivian narrated coldly. 2004. You had just been fired from that brokerage firm for incompetence. You were depressed. You wanted to be a big shot, but you didn't have the discipline. I was working 2 jobs as a structural engineer and a data analyst to pay our rent. That's irrelevant history, Preston shouted. It is foundational evidence, Arthur corrected him. Please let her finish. Vivian continued. I saw the market shifting. I wrote the code that analyzed urban development patterns. I created the business plan for Vance Global, but when it came time to pitch to investors, nobody wanted to listen to a 24-year-old woman in 2004. They wanted a shark. They wanted a man in a suit. She looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and disgust. So I dressed you up. I taught you the script. I explained the numbers to you every single night until you could repeat them like a parrot. We made a deal, Preston. I would be the brains, the silent partner, the operator. You would be the face. We agreed it was for our family. For our future. That was a verbal understanding, Preston sputtered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Even if that were true, which it isn't, it doesn't matter legally. The company is incorporated in my name. I am the CEO. You are the spouse. Spouses get alimony, not equity. You really didn't read the documents I made you sign back then, did you? Vivian asked, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. You were so eager to play the big shot CEO that you just signed wherever I pointed. Arthur Penhaligon cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, if you look at the document in front of you, Exhibit A, you will see the original incorporation charter of Vance Global. Please turn to page 14, paragraph 3. Subsection B. Derek Sterling opened the document. His hands were shaking slightly. He flipped to the page. He read it. His face went pale. He read it again. Oh my God, Derek whispered. What? Preston snapped. What does it say? Derek looked up at his client, his eyes wide with horror. Preston, this isn't a standard incorporation. It's a specialized trust structure. It lists Preston Vance as the operating manager and public representative. So I'm the manager. I run it, Preston yelled. Keep reading, Vivian commanded. Derek swallowed hard. It lists the sole beneficiary and holder of intellectual property rights as Vivian Vance, and it lists the veto power over all executive decisions as belonging to the creator of the IP. Preston snatched the paper from Derek's hands. He stared at the words, but they swam before his eyes. "This is fake. You forged this." "It was notarized in 2005, filed with the state. And here is the kicker, Preston. It has been renewed every year," Vivian said. "By you." "I never renewed this." "You sign a stack of documents every January that I put on your desk," Vivian said calmly. "You never read them. You're too busy planning your golf trips or buying jewelry for your assistants." She glanced at the diamond bracelet on Tiffany's wrist. "By the way, Tiffany, that bracelet was bought with company funds. Technically, since I am the majority owner of the assets, you're wearing stolen property." Tiffany gasped and clutched her wrist. "Preston, do something. She's calling me a thief." "Shut up, Tiffany," Preston hissed, his charm completely evaporated. He glared at Vivian. "So what? You found a loophole. You tricked me into signing over the company 20 years ago. A judge will throw this out. It's coercion. I've been running this company for 2 decades. I built the relationships. I made the deals." "Did you?" Vivian stood up. She walked over to the boxes the paralegal had brought in. She opened the top one. It was filled to the brim with yellow notepads, printed emails, and journals. "Every major deal Vance Global has made in the last 10 years, Vivian said, pulling out a binder labeled The Waterfront Project. "You came home complaining you couldn't close the deal. I stayed up all night, drafted the counterproposal and put it in your briefcase the next morning. You took credit." She pulled out another binder. The merger with Cobalt Group. "You wanted to sell. I told you to hold. I wrote the speech you gave to the board that saved the company." She dumped the contents of the box onto the table. It was a mountain of proof. Handwriting that matched hers. Dates that aligned with every major success the company had ever had. "I didn't mind being in the shadow, Preston," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a thunderclap in the quiet room. "I was happy to let you shine because I thought we were partners. I thought we were building a life. But then you started treating me like an employee you could fire. You brought her," she pointed at Tiffany, "into our bed. And then you tried to offer me pennies for an empire I built with my bare hands." Vivian leaned across the table, getting right in Preston's face. "I'm not here for a settlement, Preston. I'm here for a performance review. And you are failing." The air in the conference room was toxic. Derek Sterling, usually the picture of composure, was furiously texting on his phone, likely checking his malpractice insurance policy. Preston Vance, however, had moved past shock and into a state of volatile aggression. He was a man who had been told yes for 20 years. Hearing no wasn't just an annoyance, it was a glitch in his reality. "Performance review?" Preston laughed, though it sounded more like a choke. He stood up and buttoned his jacket, attempting to reclaim the physical dominance of the room. "You've lost your mind, Vivian. You think because you helped with some paperwork in the early days that you own me. I am Vance Global. My face is on the billboards. My handshake built the towers." He turned to his lawyer. "Derek, get security up here. Have her removed. She's trespassing on a private negotiation. And get a restraining order. She's clearly mentally unstable." Derek looked up from his phone, his face pale. "Preston, I can't do that." "Why the hell not? You work for me." "Because," Arthur Penhaligon interjected, his voice deep and resonant. "Technically, Derek works for the corporation. And according to the documents we just presented, Mrs. Vance is the controlling entity of that corporation. If anyone is trespassing here, Preston, it's you." "I am the CEO," Preston roared. He grabbed the conference phone in the center of the table and stabbed the button for his executive assistant, Jessica. "Jessica, get security to the Sterling conference room immediately. We have a hostile situation." The speakerphone crackled. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance." Jessica's voice came through, sounding strangely distant. "I can't do that." "What do you mean you can't? Do you want to be fired?" "I've already been given new instructions." "Sir," Jessica replied, from the chairwoman. Preston froze. He looked slowly at Vivian. She was calmly pouring herself a glass of sparkling water. "Jessica," Vivian said toward the speakerphone, not even raising her voice, "thank you for your discretion. Please hold all of Mr. Vance's calls. He is currently indisposed." "Yes, Mrs. Vance," Jessica replied promptly. The line went dead. Preston stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. "You turned my assistant against me. How long has this been going on?" "Jessica didn't need much convincing," Vivian said, taking a sip of water. "She's seen how you treat people, Preston. She's seen the way you scream at interns when your coffee is 3 degrees too cold. She's seen you expense client dinners that were actually weekend getaways with Tiffany." Tiffany, who had been trying to make herself small in her chair, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, you took other girls on trips?" Preston whipped around. "Not now, Tiffany." Vivian smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "Oh, didn't you know, dear? You aren't the first, Tiffany. You're just the first one he was foolish enough to bring to a legal proceeding. There was a Crystal in 2018, a Bella in 2021. Preston has a type, young, ambitious, and easily impressed by a black credit card." "That's a lie!" Preston shouted, though the vein throbbing in his temple suggested otherwise. "She's trying to manipulate you, Tiff. Don't listen to her." "I'm not manipulating anyone," Vivian said. "I'm just clarifying the budget." "Speaking of which," she turned to Arthur, "activate the protocol." Arthur typed a few commands into his laptop. On the projector screen, a new window popped up. It was a live feed of the Vance Global Server Diagnostics. It showed a complex web of data streams, the Skyline algorithm at work. "What are you doing?" Preston demanded. "The Skyline algorithm," Vivian explained, "is designed to predict real estate trends by analyzing microeconomic shifts. It runs the entire company. It decides what land we buy, what prices we set, what contractors we hire. It is the brain of the company." "I know what it does," Preston snapped. "Do you?" Vivian challenged. "Then tell me, Preston, what happens if the source code is disconnected?" "It stops updating." "No," Vivian said. "It activates a failsafe I wrote in 2006. It's called the dead man's switch. If the system detects unauthorized tampering, say a CEO trying to liquidate assets to hide money from his wife, it locks down." Arthur hit the enter key. On the screen, the green data streams instantly turned red. A large padlock icon appeared in the center of the screen. "System locked. Authorization required. Level Alpha." At that exact moment, Preston's phone buzzed. Then Derek's phone buzzed. Then, surprisingly, Tiffany's phone buzzed. Preston pulled his phone out. A notification from his bank, Vance Global Corporate Card ending in 4490, has been suspended. "My cards," Preston gasped. "You froze the company accounts." "I froze everything," Vivian corrected. "The operating accounts, the payroll accounts, and yes, your personal expense accounts, which are tied to the company ledger to avoid taxes. Another little crime we'll discuss later." Tiffany looked at her phone, her eyes wide with panic. "My lease, my car payment. Preston, the auto draft just bounced. I got an alert." "You pay for her apartment?" Vivian asked, raising an eyebrow. "How cliché. And with shareholder money. That's embezzlement, Preston." "It's a consultant fee," Preston argued, sweating profusely now. "She's a brand ambassador." "She's an expense I am cutting," Vivian said. She closed the file folder in front of her. Here is the reality, Preston. You walked in here thinking you were going to give me a condo and a pat on the head. But right now, you don't even have enough money to buy lunch. Preston slumped into his chair. The arrogance was draining out of him, replaced by the terrified realization of a man who had never actually had to survive on his own. He looked at Derek. "Fix this," Preston whispered hoarsely. "Derek, do something legal. Sue her. Get an injunction." Derek Sterling slowly closed his laptop. He put his pen in his pocket. He stood up. "Where are you going?" Preston demanded. "Preston," Derek said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "My retainer is paid through the corporate account. That account is frozen. Furthermore, Mrs. Vance has just presented evidence of potential embezzlement and fraud on your part. If I continue to represent you, I could be seen as complicit. You're firing me? In the middle of the hearing?" "I'm recusing myself," Derek said. He looked at Vivian and nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Penhaligon, good day." Derek walked out of the room, leaving Preston and Tiffany alone with the wolves. Preston looked at the empty chair where his lawyer had been. He looked at Tiffany, who was frantically texting, likely looking for a backup plan. Then he looked at Vivian. For the first time in years, he didn't see the woman who did his laundry. He saw the woman who held his life in her hands. "Vivian," Preston said, his voice trembling. "Baby, let's not be hasty. We can talk about this. We're a team, right? We built this together." Vivian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Now we're a team? 5 minutes ago, I was a liability. 5 minutes ago, I was yesterday's news." "I was just posturing," Preston pleaded. "It's business. You know how I get. I didn't mean it." "That's the problem, Preston," Vivian said, standing up. "You never mean anything. You just say whatever you think will get you what you want. But words have consequences. And actions?" She tapped the red binder. "Actions have receipts." Arthur Penhaligon suggested a 15-minute recess. It wasn't for Vivian's benefit. She looked like she could go another 10 rounds without breaking a sweat. But to let the reality of the situation marinate in Preston's mind. Vivian and Arthur remained in the conference room, while Preston and Tiffany retreated to the hallway. Through the glass walls, Vivian watched them. The dynamic had shifted physically. Before, Preston had stood tall, with Tiffany hanging on him like an ornament. Now Preston was pacing frantically, his hands in his hair, while Tiffany stood against the wall, arms crossed, looking at him with a mixture of annoyance and dawning horror. Inside the room, Arthur poured 2 coffees. "You played that perfectly, Vivian," Arthur said quietly. "Locking the accounts was the nuclear option. I didn't think you'd do it this early." Vivian sighed, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. The steel facade softened, revealing the exhaustion underneath. "He left me no choice, Arthur. If I didn't stop the money now, he would have drained the offshore accounts by noon. I know him. When Preston gets scared, he steals." "We have him cornered," Arthur noted. "But a cornered animal bites. He's going to try something desperate." "I'm counting on it," Vivian said, taking the coffee. "Preston isn't smart, but he is slippery. He thinks he has one card left to play." "The chaotic investor?" Arthur asked. "The chaotic investor," Vivian confirmed. Meanwhile, out in the hallway, the power couple was disintegrating. "What do you mean you don't have access to the Cayman account?" Tiffany hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You told me that was your freedom fund. You said she didn't know about it." "She shouldn't know about it," Preston whispered back, checking over his shoulder to make sure no paralegals were listening. "I set that up under a shell company, Vance Ventures. It's completely separate from the main holdings." "Then transfer the money," Tiffany demanded. "Transfer it to my account now, before she freezes that too. We can leave. We can go to Saint-Tropez tonight." Preston fumbled with his phone, his fingers shaking. He logged into the offshore banking app. He waited for the Face ID to load. The little wheel spun. Access denied. Account flagged for suspicious activity. No, Preston moaned, tapping the screen aggressively. "This can't be happening." Let me see. Tiffany snatched the phone. She read the error message. Her face hardened. She looked at Preston, really looked at him, for the first time without the filter of his wealth. She saw a 50-year-old man with dyed hair, a panic sweat staining his expensive collar, and absolutely zero power. "You're broke," she stated flatly. "It's temporary," Preston insisted. "Vivian is bluffing. I can override this. I just need to call the board. The board of directors loves me. They won't let her tank the stock price just to get revenge on me. They'll fire her." "You said you owned the company," Tiffany said, her voice rising. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie. I'm the CEO." "You're a figurehead." Tiffany spat the word out like it was poison. "She built it. She owns it. You're just the mascot." "Tiffany, baby, keep your voice down. Don't baby me," she snapped. She reached into her purse and pulled out the velvet box Preston had given her that morning. It contained a set of diamond earrings intended to be a celebration gift for after the divorce hearing. She tossed the box at his chest. "I'm not going down with the ship, Preston. I have a brand to protect. I can't be associated with a fraud investigation." "You're leaving?" Preston looked stricken. "But we're in love." Tiffany let out a cruel, short laugh. "I was in love with the lifestyle, Preston. I was in love with the penthouse and the trips. You think I listened to your boring stories about conquering the market because I found you fascinating? You're an ego with legs." She turned on her heel, her red soles clicking sharply on the marble floor. "Tiffany, wait!" Preston called out, reaching for her. She didn't look back. She marched towards the elevators, pressed the button, and vanished. Preston stood alone in the hallway of the law firm. Passers-by, interns, other lawyers, glanced at him and quickly looked away. He felt naked. For 20 years his confidence had been armor-bought with Vivian's money. Now he was exposed. But desperation breeds creativity. Preston's eyes narrowed. He remembered something Vivian had said. The board. He still had the board of directors. Most of them were his old drinking buddies. He had wined and dined them for years. They didn't know Vivian. They only knew Preston. If he could get them on the phone, if he could spin this as a hostile takeover by an unstable ex-wife, he could get a vote of no confidence against her. He could regain control. He pulled out his phone again. He dialed the number of Charles Whitmore, the chairman of the board. "Charles," Preston said, forcing a jovial tone into his voice when the man answered. "So glad I caught you." "Preston?" Charles sounded confused. "I'm in a meeting. Is everything all right?" "Listen, Charles. We have a situation. Vivian she's having a breakdown. She's hacked the system. She's locked the accounts. She's claiming she owns the IP. It's insane, obviously. I need you to call an emergency vote. We need to override her access immediately before she damages the company reputation." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Charles?" Preston asked. "Are you there?" "Preston," Charles said slowly. "I'm not in a random meeting. I'm in an emergency board meeting right now." Preston's stomach dropped. "What?" "We were called into session 30 minutes ago," Charles said, "by Vivian. You're talking to her." "She's not here physically, Preston. She sent over a dossier," Charles said, his voice turning icy. "A very thick dossier. It contains bank transfers, emails, and recordings." "Recordings?" Preston whispered. "Recordings of you, Preston," Charles said. "Bragging to your mistress about how you were skimming off the construction contracts to pay for your yacht. Bragging about how the board was a bunch of senile old fools that you could manipulate." Preston closed his eyes. He remembered that conversation. It was 3 months ago. He was drunk on champagne in Cabo. He thought he was safe. "Vivian has proof of gross misconduct, Preston," Charles continued. "We're voting in 5 minutes, and frankly, after what I just read, you shouldn't expect a golden parachute. You should expect an indictment." The line went dead. Preston lowered the phone. He looked back at the conference room. Through the glass, he saw Vivian. She wasn't looking at him. She was reading a file, calm, composed, and utterly victorious. He had one move left. It was the dirtiest move in the book, but he had nothing to lose. He smoothed his hair, fixed his tie, and walked back into the room. When Preston re-entered the room, he didn't look defeated. He looked dangerous. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, malicious resolve. He sat down, ignoring the fact that his lawyer had fled and his mistress had dumped him. "You think you're so smart," Preston said, staring directly at Vivian. "You think you've won because you have the numbers. But you forgot one thing, Vivian. You forgot about the devastating little secret in the closet." Vivian didn't flinch. "I have no secrets, Preston. My life has been an open book of service to you and this family." "Not your secret," Preston sneered. "Our secret. Or rather, the company's secret." Arthur Penhaligon leaned forward. "Mr. Vance, I would advise you to be very careful about what you say next. Anything said in this room is on the record." "I want it on the record." "Listen," Preston shouted. "Let's talk about the frantic cleanup of 2015. The structural failure at the West Side Plaza project." Vivian's expression shifted just for a microsecond. It was the first time she looked genuinely wary. Preston saw it and pounced. Ah, she remembers. The concrete was substandard. The building was sinking. We had to reinforce the foundation overnight to pass inspection. It cost millions, money we didn't have. He leaned across the table, his eyes gleaming. "I paid off the inspector, Vivian. I bribed a city official to look the other way while we fixed it. It was a felony, and you knew about it. You signed the checks for the consulting fees that were actually bribes." Preston sat back, crossing his arms. "So here is the deal. You unfreeze my accounts, you give me 50% of the company, and you let me walk away with my reputation intact. If you don't, I go to the DA. I turn myself in, and I take you down with me. We both go to prison for bribery and fraud." "I'm willing to burn, Vivian." "Are you?" It was a classic, mutually assured destruction strategy. If he went down, he would drag the architect down with him. The room was silent. Arthur looked at Vivian, waiting for her instruction. Vivian slowly closed the binder she was reading. She took off her glasses and cleaned them methodically. "The West Side Plaza project," Vivian mused. 2015. Yes, I remember it well. You came home panic-stricken. You told me the concrete supplier had scammed us. You told me the building was going to collapse. You told me you needed $500,000 in cash to fix the problem with the inspector. "Exactly," Preston gloated. "And you gave it to me. You were complicit." "I gave you the money," Vivian agreed, "because I trusted you to handle the crisis. You told me the bribe was paid. You told me the inspector signed off because of the money." "And he did," Preston said. "So we are partners in crime, darling." "Nah." Vivian reached into the second box of files, the one she hadn't touched yet. She pulled out a thin black folder. "For 10 years I believed that, Preston," Vivian said softly. "I lived with the guilt that my company was built on a bribe. I lost sleep over it. I thought we were criminals." She slid the black folder across the table. "But then, when I started preparing for this divorce, I did a deep audit. I tracked down that building inspector, Mr. Henderson. He's retired now." Preston's smile faltered. "You talked to him?" "I did," Vivian said. "Mr. Henderson is a very honest man. He told me he never took a dime from you. He told me he passed the building because the reinforcement work we did was actually sound. He signed off on it because it was safe, not because he was paid." Preston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "So," Vivian continued, her voice rising in intensity, "I had to wonder, where did the $500,000 go? The money I withdrew from our savings. The money you said was for a bribe." She flipped the folder open. It contained a copy of a bank transfer receipt from 2015. It didn't go to the inspector, Preston. It went to an account in Nevada, an account linked to a high-stakes poker room at the Bellagio. Preston turned grey. You didn't bribe anyone, Vivian said, her voice dripping with disgust. You had a gambling debt. You used a structural crisis, a crisis that could have killed people, as a cover story to steal $500,000 from your own wife to pay off a bookie. Vivian stood up, towering over him. I am not your partner in crime, Preston. I am your victim. And this, she pointed to the document, this is the final nail in your coffin. There is no mutually assured destruction. There is only your destruction. Preston looked at the document. He looked at the door. He realized there was no exit. The threat he thought was his ace in the hole was actually just another evidence of his betrayal. You kept receipts for everything, Preston whispered, terrified. Who does that? Who keeps records from 10 years ago? A woman who knows her husband is a liar, Vivian answered. I didn't want to believe it back then. I buried my head in the sand. But deep down, I knew one day I would need this. She turned to Arthur. Mr. Penhaligon, I think we're done here. Please inform the board that Mr. Vance has been removed for cause, effective immediately. And please forward this file regarding the gambling embezzlement to the district attorney. I believe filing a false police report and fraud are charges they might be interested in. Wait! Preston scrambled up, dropping to his knees. It was a pathetic sight. The titan of industry on the floor in his expensive suit. Vivian, please! Prison! You can't send me to prison. I'm the father of... Well, we don't have children, but I'm your husband. We have history. We have history, Vivian agreed, looking down at him coldly. And today I am rewriting the ending. She picked up her bag. I'm taking the company, Preston. I'm taking the house. I'm taking the beach house. And since you mentioned it, I'm taking the dog, too. We don't have a dog, Preston blubbered. I'm getting one, Vivian said, and I'm naming him Preston, so I can teach him to sit and stay, something you never learned to do. She turned and walked towards the door, but the drama wasn't quite over. Just as Vivian reached the handle, the heavy doors swung open from the outside. Standing there were 2 uniformed police officers and a detective in a cheap suit. Preston Vance? The detective asked, scanning the room. Preston, still on his knees, looked up with wide, watery eyes. Yes? We have a warrant for your arrest, the detective said, pulling out handcuffs. But not for the embezzlement. That's a civil matter for now. Then for what? Preston squeaked. Vivian paused at the door, looking back. She looked just as confused as Preston. She hadn't called the police yet. Tax evasion, the detective said, walking over and hauling Preston to his feet, and trafficking in stolen goods. Trafficking? Preston shouted as the cuffs clicked. What are you talking about? The detective held up an evidence bag. Inside was the diamond bracelet Tiffany had been wearing. We picked up a Miss Tiffany Banks in the lobby, the detective said. She was trying to pawn this. Turns out this bracelet was reported stolen from a jewelry store in Paris 3 years ago. The serial numbers match. Miss Banks claims you gave it to her. She's singing like a canary downstairs, Mr. Vance. Vivian's jaw dropped slightly. Then a small, genuine smile appeared. It was the only twist she hadn't orchestrated herself. Preston hadn't just bought the jewelry with company funds. He had bought stolen jewelry on the black market to save money, and passed it off as retail to his mistresses. Cheap to the bitter end, Vivian murmured. She stepped aside to let the officers escort a weeping, shouting Preston Vance out of the conference room. As he passed her, he locked eyes with her one last time. Vivian, call someone! Get me a lawyer! He screamed. Vivian checked her watch. I'm sorry, Preston. I have a board meeting to chair, and after that, I have a date. A date? With who? Preston yelled as he was dragged down the hall. With my future, Vivian said to the empty air. As the police cruiser's sirens faded into the distance, carrying Preston Vance to a booking center, the silence in the hallway of the law firm was deafening. Most women would have collapsed. Most women would have needed a moment to cry, to process the trauma of seeing their husband arrested and their marriage incinerated in the span of 2 hours. Vivian Vance checked her lipstick in the reflection of the glass door. It was still perfect. "Arthur," she said, her voice steady, "do we have the encrypted drive?" Arthur Penhaligon, who had watched the arrest with the grim satisfaction of an executioner, nodded. "It's in my briefcase. But Vivian, are you sure you want to go straight to the board? You've just dismantled your husband's life. You can take a day." "I don't have a day," Vivian said, starting to walk towards the elevators. "Preston was desperate. I know him. He didn't just try to steal money. If he knew he was going down, he would have set a trap, a poison pill to make sure that if he couldn't have the company, no one could. We need to get to the headquarters before the market closes." They took the elevator down to the garage, Arthur's driver speeding them toward the gleaming glass tower of Vance Global in the financial district. When they arrived, the atmosphere in the building was chaotic. News of the CEO's arrest had leaked to TMZ. Employees were huddled in cubicles, whispering. Phones were ringing off the hook. Vivian walked through the lobby like a storm front. She bypassed the security desk. The guards, recognizing the true power in the room, simply nodded, and went straight to the executive elevator. The boardroom on the 50th floor was filled with 12 men in grey suits. They were the old guard, the men who had drunk scotch with Preston and laughed at his jokes while he burned the company's cash. When Vivian entered, the room went silent. Charles Whitmore, the chairman, stood up. He looked flustered. "Vivian, this is highly irregular. We appreciate you sending the evidence, and obviously we've voted to remove Preston. But you can't just barge in here. We need to appoint an interim CEO. We were thinking of bringing in someone from—" "Sit down, Charles," Vivian said. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. She threw her bag on the massive oak table and took the seat at the head, Preston's seat. "I am not here to interview for the job," Vivian announced. "I own 51% of the voting shares via the original trust structure. I am the CEO, and right now, we have a bigger problem than bad PR." "What problem?" a board member named Richard asked. "Preston is in jail. The rot is gone." "Preston was a coward," Vivian said, opening her laptop and connecting it to the main screen. "And cowards are spiteful. Arthur, run the diagnostic on the overseas assets." Arthur typed furiously. On the giant screen, a map of the world appeared. Red dots began to blink rapidly across Europe and Asia. "What is that?" Charles asked, squinting. "That," Vivian said, "is an automated liquidation protocol. It triggered the moment Preston's biometrics were logged into the police database. He linked the company's core assets, our land holdings, our development contracts, to a dead hand switch. The room erupted in shouts. "He's selling off the assets? To who?" "Not to who," Vivian said grimly. "To what?" She pulled up a file. Preston didn't just owe money to the Bellagio. He owed money to the Kensington Syndicate. It's a shadow banking cartel operating out of London. They loan money to desperate executives at 40% interest. Preston borrowed $50 million 6 months ago to cover the losses from his failed crypto real estate venture that none of you knew about. The board members turned pale. 50 million? "And since he can't pay," Vivian continued, "the dead hand switch is automatically transferring the title deeds of our prime properties to a shell company owned by the syndicate. If that transfer completes, Vance Global is empty. We'll be a shell company with nothing but debt." "Stop it!" Richard yelled. "Unplug the servers." "It's cloud-based, you idiot," Vivian snapped. "Unplugging the servers does nothing. The transfer is 80% complete. We have 10 minutes before the final handshake protocol locks the assets away forever." "Call the police!" Charles cried. "Call the FBI!" "The FBI will take 2 years to investigate," Vivian said. "By then the buildings will be sold, the money laundered, and this company will be bankrupt. We have to stop it now." "How?" Arthur asked. The encryption on a syndicate transfer is military grade. Vivian took a deep breath. She cracked her knuckles. She sat down at the keyboard. Preston thought he was smart, she murmured, her eyes scanning the lines of code cascading down the screen. He thought he hired the best hackers money could buy to set this up. But he forgot one thing. What? Charles whispered, terrified. He used the Skyline algorithm as the carrier signal, Vivian said, her fingers flying across the keys. He used my code to hide the transfer. The room watched in breathless silence. This wasn't the simple housewife they had dismissed for years. This was a virtuoso. Vivian wasn't just typing. She was battling. She was rewriting the logic of the transfer in real time, building a digital firewall to block the outgoing data. Come on, she whispered to herself. Block the port, reroute the packet. On the screen, a progress bar showed the transfer at 95%, then 96%, 97%. It's not stopping, Richard screamed. I have to crash the system, Vivian said. I have to corrupt the data so the syndicate rejects the transfer. If you corrupt the data, we lose the historical records, Charles argued. We'll be flying blind. Better blind than dead, Vivian retorted. She hit a final sequence of keys. Authorization override. Vivian_V_admin. Command purge. The screen flashed red, then black. The progress bar froze at 99%. For 10 seconds, no one breathed. Then a small green text appeared in the center of the void. Transfer failed. Assets returned to source. Vivian slumped back in her chair, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding for 20 years. It's done. The assets are safe. The syndicate gets nothing. The boardroom was silent. The men looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Vivian stood up, smoothing her suit jacket. She looked at Charles. Now, about my leadership. Charles swallowed hard. He looked at the black screen, then at the woman who had just saved their fortunes. I make a motion, he stammered, to confirm Vivian Vance as permanent CEO and chairwoman of the board. Seconded, Richard said immediately. All in favor? Every hand in the room shot up. Vivian didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded. Good, now get out. I have work to do. And Charles? Yes, Vivian. You knew about the crypto venture, she said coldly. I saw your signature on the authorization for the initial feasibility study. Charles froze. Have your resignation on my desk by morning, Vivian said, or I hand that file to the FBI too. Charles turned grey, nodded once, and fled the room. Vivian walked to the window. She looked out at the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the empire she had built, saved, and finally claimed. But she wasn't done. The snake's head had been cut off, but the venom was still in the system. The syndicate wouldn't just walk away from $50 million. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered. This is Vance. Mrs. Vance, a voice said. It was smooth, British, and utterly terrifying. This is Mr. Kensington. You seem to have cancelled a transaction that was due to us. I cancelled a theft, Mr. Kensington, Vivian replied, her voice hard as diamond. Your husband borrowed money. Debts must be paid. If we don't get our property, we will come for it. And we don't sue. We collect. I know how you operate, Vivian said. But before you send your collectors, you might want to check your email. Excuse me? I just sent you a file, Vivian said. While I was blocking your transfer, I reverse-traced the connection. I have the IP addresses of your servers in the Caymans. I have your client list. I have the names of the politicians you bribe. There was a long silence on the other end. If I see so much as a shadow of one of your men near me or my company, Vivian said, I send that list to Interpol, the CIA, and the news. You lose $50 million today, Mr. Kensington. Try me, and you lose everything. The silence stretched for another 5 seconds, then a low chuckle. Preston Vance was a fool, the voice said. He told us his wife was a decorative object. Clearly he was mistaken. We will... write off the loss as a gesture of respect. "Good day, Mrs. Vance." The line went dead. Vivian lowered the phone. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She was trembling, just slightly. It was over. The husband, the mistress, the board, the mafia. She had beaten them all. 6 months later. The Federal Correctional Facility in upstate New York was a grey, soulless void that smelled of bleach and regret. Preston Vance sat in the visitation room, looking 20 years older than the man who had strutted into the law firm. His silver hair was overgrown, showing grey roots, and his jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. When the heavy steel door opened, Vivian walked in. She was the picture of vitality, wearing a cream cashmere coat that cost more than Preston's former bail. She sat down, placing a single leather portfolio on the metal table. "You look good," Preston rasped. "I heard Vance Global stock is up 40%. "Business is thriving," Vivian said coolly. "We just launched the Sustainable Energy Initiative. Which brings me to why I'm here. I need the deed to your grandfather's hunting cottage in Vermont. It connects 2 parcels of land I need for a research center." Preston scoffed, a ghost of his old arrogance returning. "Forget it. That cottage is the only thing I have left. My lawyer says with the plea deal for tax evasion, I'll be out in 3 years. I'm going to retire there." Vivian stared at him with pity. "You really don't know, do you?" "Know what?" "You aren't getting out in 3 years, Preston," Vivian said, opening the portfolio. "You're looking at 25. Minimum." Preston went pale. "What? That's impossible." "Tiffany didn't leave town," Vivian revealed, dropping the bombshell. "She turned state's witness. The district attorney offered her full immunity if she handed over her insurance policy. She recorded you, Preston. For 2 years. The arson in Jersey, the Kensington laundering. She gave them everything." Preston slumped back, the air leaving his lungs. She recorded me?" "The new indictment drops tomorrow," Vivian continued. "Racketeering and grand larceny. You'll die in here, Preston." He began to tremble, tears welling in his eyes. "Vivian, please, you have to help me. I'm scared. The syndicate guys are in general population." "I can't get you out," Vivian said, "but I can make it bearable. I know the warden. If you sign over the cottage, I can get you transferred to the low-security wing. Single-cell library job, safe from the gangs." She uncapped a pen. "Or you can keep the cabin you'll never see again, and take your chances in the yard." It wasn't a choice. It was a mercy killing. With a shaking hand, Preston took the pen and signed away his last possession. Vivian took the deed and stood up to leave. "Vivian," Preston called out, his voice cracking. "Did you ever love me? Or was it always just business?" Vivian paused at the door, looking back at the man she had wasted 2 decades on. "I loved you enough to build you a throne," she said softly, "but you loved yourself too much to sit on it." The door clanged shut, sealing his fate. An hour later, Vivian stepped out of the city animal shelter into the bright Chicago sun. She wasn't alone. Trotting beside her on a leash was a scruffy 3-legged mutt she had just adopted. "What's his name?" Arthur asked as he opened the door to her limousine. Vivian looked down at the dog, who gazed up at her with pure, unearned loyalty. "Atlas," Vivian smiled, scratching him behind the ears, "because he's going to help me hold up the world." She climbed into the car, the dog hopping in beside her, and they drove off toward the skyline she finally, truly owned. And that is the story of how Vivian Vance turned a betrayal into an empire. She didn't just get mad. She got everything. Preston thought he could discard her like an old receipt. But he forgot that she was the one who balanced the books. In the end, he lost his fortune, his freedom, and his reputation, while Vivian proved that the true power behind the throne isn't the one wearing the crown. It's the one who built the kingdom. I hope you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge and corporate justice. If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you were Vivian? Would you have visited Preston in prison or just let him rot? I'll see you in the next video.